Welcome in to AWA Unleashed. We are the self-proclaimed preeminent #1 podcast dedicated to telling the stories and reliving the memories of the American Wrestling Association, the wrestling territory that we consider to be the #1 territory in the history of the wrestling industry. My name is Chris Tubbs, but let's bring in the other two. Let's bring in Mick Karch and Polish Show. And before we get going, Mick, I got something you and I need to do. Ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
I see your cat running away.
Birthday, dear Polish Joe Chempik. Happy birthday to you.
Your cat will now never ever appear on the podcast again because he doesn't want to be associated with the American Idol dropouts. But thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Wow.
Hey, even on it's my birthday, I can give you shit all I want.
All we wanted to do was be nice to you on your birthday, and you're just.
Then why did we sing to him?
Oh, wow. Screw you guys. Do the podcast on your own.
There he goes. There he goes. Jesse Ventura, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm taking my
headset. That's it. He's gone. Wait a minute. There he is.
He's back.
I know. Sucks to be you guys.
There he is.
Hey, this is going to be a fun show, guys, because this is all about your questions, what you want to know, and we continue even when we don't have any Q&A scheduled. I feel like here's a chance to, because people are always asking questions. So here's a chance, you guys, that we're going to have another no DQ&A. We're going to get to those in just a minute. Take care of the business, as they say. You see Soda Stick up there. That's the place to get your AWA Unleashed swag. sodastickco.com/unleashed. Use the promo code Unleashed to get 15% off. As well, you've got 7th Avenue Pizza. I just had a 7th Avenue Pizza last night, you guys. So good. I just had their Italian sausage. It was awesome. It's great for putting on the grill now. If you want to put it in the grill, you want to, put it out in your egg. There's so many different ways you can make these if you don't want to even heat up the oven. 7th Avenue Pizza.com. Okay, so we have got, outside of Joe's birthday, we've got questions, we've got answers. But first of all, Mick, I know that you want to make an acknowledgement here early on.
This is getting to be way too often that I'm doing this. We're doing this. Another wrestler has passed, and one of the great lady wrestlers of the modern era, and even just a little bit before, and that is Peggy Lee Leather. Peggy Fowler was her real name. Just a great competitor. I mean, literally wrestled all over the world. She kind of did the biker gimmick. She wrestled under a mask. She was Peggy Lee at one time, then Peggy Lee Leather, and just a super gal. And I know the ladies of the 1980s wrestling community, 1990s community are very heartsick over Peggy's passing. One very interesting note that there's a video from Las Vegas. I did ring announcing one night when Peggy was coming into the ring, and I got in her way as I was getting out of the ring. And you don't hear her say this, but she whispered to me, "Will you get the F out of my way, please?" And I said, "Oh, yes, ma'am." And, I reminded her that last time I saw her a couple of years ago at Cauliflower Alley Club. But what a competitor. Her matches with Bambi for years and years on the circuit are very well known. So Godspeed, Peggy.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to work with her at the Showboat on more than one occasion. Mick, you brought up that she was your modern era, old school. She was right in that transitional period.
Yeah, she
was. To me, Peggy fit more into the, shall we just say, older school.
Absolutely.
Her style, just everything about her. and she helped transition some of the next wave, the Medusa Michellis of the world. Great worker, very, very nice, very pleasant person to work with. You definitely had more interactions with her than I did, but your sentiment of this happening all too often, yeah, it sucks. Seems like every week we're paying tribute to another legend that were trailblazers, and yeah, it's tough. I don't want to, sell it anything shorter than it's a tough thing, but we must move on, and by doing that, we can keep the podcast going and continue to pay tributes to those who stepped onto that mat, wiped their feet before they entered the ring, as a tribute to those that came before them. And we shall do that now. Here, let me wipe off my microphone for the tribute to Peggy Lee.
And I think that's a good point that you made there, Joe, because you see some people that do it and some that don't. And it is like the older school that, it seems like that's kind of something that sometimes you don't really see with some of the younger wrestlers in terms of wiping their boots on the outside before they get in.
And I understand, kayfabe going away, needing to, as some would say, but there's just some things that should be respected. I think it has been done for so long, and it's not something that's commonly known, or at least it used to not be commonly known among the fans as to why they would wipe their feet before they got into the ring. And I like to believe that if those that don't do that were told that they would get that measure of respect for the generations of legends and superstars. Heck, even the guys who didn't make it anywhere, it's still a tribute to those who have entered the ring previously. So, but that aside, rest in peace, Peggy. Thanks for all that you've provided for us.
And Mick, as it relates to your story, that may be the first time I've ever heard somebody say, "Get the fuck out of my way, please."
Please, she was pleasant.
Please. So yeah. That's the first time that I've ever heard that.
Well, the thing is, if she wouldn't have said please, what am I going to do about it?
Tell you're gonna move anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah. You're moving whether or not you want to move. Right. She's gonna move you. All right, let's get to some questions here, guys. The first one is for me from Marsha Urvasti. Her brother's a big fan of the Long Riders, Bill and Scott Irwin. They were in the AWA in the mid 80s. Did I ever get a chance to see them in person? If so, what did I think? Her brother says they used the old loaded boot story. I've known that they have used the loaded boot. It was part of their stick, their gimmick. I never saw them live, but everything that I've seen from them, they just the wild, crazy, unpredictable bikers. I liked it. Like I dig the gimmick. It was a shame that, Scott Irwin, got sick like he did, but I enjoyed it. Like when, I just watching the match between, those guys and Scott Hall and Kurt Hennig, like I enjoyed that. Like I thought that they were a good fit for what the AWA needed in the mid 80s.
Absolutely. They were, and very underrated. You hear about the Road Warriors and the High Flyers and Ventura and Adonis, but the Long Riders were great. And that loaded boot gimmick, that old tried and true load the boot, it's worked for forever. And yeah, as you said, very, very sad that Scott, that's Scott on your right, ladies and gentlemen, left us early. Scott and Bill, the Long Riders, wrestled, of course, as the Super Destroyers, the masked tag team down in the Texas area. Great legends, both of them. While Bill is still around, one of my favorite guys in the business. And I agree with you. Very, very good talents.
I feel during their run, as a fan, because Scott, and if I'm off on the dates, I'll apologize, but Scott got sick shortly after Wrestle Rock. And it was very early in my career with the AWA. So I'm reflecting back, I guess more as a fan when I say this, that to me, the Road War or the Long Riders were the only team in the AWA that I thought had at least a chance at beating the Road Warriors, that they matched up the best with them. They were like an evil version of the Crusher on motorcycles.
Yeah.
You know, bar going, beer drinking, just wild bad boys.
Tough guys that would like to fight.
Exactly. And so that's why it felt that, to me, they matched up well with the Road Warriors. And sadly, Scott got sick and left us way too early. But Mick, you're right. They were underrated, severely underrated. If you take a look at their whole body of work, they deserve a spot at, near the top of that tag team list in the AWA.
Absolutely.
All right, let's go to the next one here for you, Mick, from Tom Badnow. Longtime fan here. One of the guys I remember that wrestled on TV a lot was a guy named Cesar Pabon. I think Marty O'Neill introduced him one time as Always Ready. Do you remember him? And is he still with us?
An amazing story. Cesar Pabon was one of the guys that would come in from the Milwaukee area, along with Angel Rivera and Armando Rodriguez, all the guys that were familiar to AWA wrestling fans. And he would come on TV. I never saw Cesar win a match. There he is. And what's amazing about Cesar, if he's still with us, and I believe he is, 94 years old at last check. And Cesar actually went to the aid of our country in the Korean War. There was a special battalion of Latinos that were sent out to fight for the United States in the Korean War. And he's a true hero. And he's trained a lot of wrestlers over the years. A lot of them got started in Milwaukee. And Cesar, hats off to you, especially at this time of the year. And yeah, I hope he's still with us. But again, at last check, 94 years old. God bless him.
He survived Korea. He survived selling, shall we say, in the AWA. Hats off to you, Mr. Pabon.
Yes.
All right, the next one for you, again, Mick, from Walt Anderson. Towards the end of the AWA, Larry Zbyszko and Mr. Saito traded the belt back and forth. Looking back at the roster in those last days, was there anyone else who could have sold tickets as a champion?
I looked at that roster, and Joe, you were there. I don't think anybody was going to sell tickets for the AWA, first of all, at that point. I mean, the Rochester TV tapings, I think, are proof of the pudding. As I looked at the roster, the only one that I could think of that maybe would have had a chance would have been Sergeant Slaughter. And this is 1990, but by 91, Sarge was already doing the Gulf War thing with Vince McMahon and the WWE. So that would have been short-lived. Baron, at that point in his career, well on in his career. Otherwise, you're getting down to the not the lesser talent, but I guess the lesser known guys. So, I think, Joe, you might agree with this one. You look at it and it really provides a snapshot of the AWA landscape right at the very end there. I think Sarge may have been the only guy.
Well, I believe it was May of 90 when we did the last live event. I think it was, at least in the Twin Cities, Twin Wars. And again, if I'm wrong, this is what I'm remembering. So, Zbyszko had the belt, but if I want to back up maybe a year, go back to 89-ish. One other name that what you had said, Mick, nobody's was going to sell tickets for the AWA at the time. The end was near. It was on life support. Hulk Hogan could have come in and not revived the AWA at that time. But there's one name that I thought at the time that he was somebody who was going to have a good career was DJ Peterson. I thought he was a good worker, really good worker. I thought that his promos were good. He's still a little green. If he'd have had a little more time, he might have been able to run with it. And you look like Daniel Boone now with the shadow hat behind you there, Mick.
Hennig, the cat lad, has made an appearance.
So when it comes to DJ Peterson, any concern, guys, that, and I mean, we're looking back at it now, hindsight 2020, but could you have said that was, maybe kind of building off of what Crockett was doing and what they had with a Magnum TA? Because I feel like the look was very similar.
It was. I mean, that's a good point. And when DJ came
I don't mean to ask so many questions. Sorry.
No. Oh, yeah. You can't. Your questions add nothing to the podcast. I want you to know that. Okay. But we'll talk about that sometime because anyway, DJ Peterson, he actually kind of got thrust into tag team stuff early on. Along with that Master of 1001 Holds, JT Southern.
Initial shock.
The initial shock. Great. But then DJ, of course, got into a program with Kevin Kelly, and then he got into it with Medusa a little bit. So he kind of a little bit of an offshoot. And of course, one half of the former AWA World Tag Team Champions at the very end. But again, Joe, I think you and I agree there would have been nothing at that point that would have even filled up one section of the arena in Rochester. It was all over. So, and again, with Sarge at least had that worldwide recognition. But again, time frame wise, he was headed out east, and that was that.
Yep, I agree, 100%.
All right, guys, let's get to the next one here. This one kind of concerns me from Lane Peller. This is for both of you guys. Did you ever try Vern Gagne's? And I don't know if somebody added this, but I see the words great tasting protein powder.
Let me tell you about that. I think you've got a still shot, don't you, Chris, of the label or the can or the
I do, yes.
Bottle or whatever. Yeah,
I'm surprised that somebody would have said the words great tasting, but I mean, I never had it, but why don't you guys kind of take me through it?
Well, chocolate chalk, I think, would probably be a good definition. I personally had one sip of it. It was a protein drink. This was way before the market was glutted with protein drinks. Vern had his vitamins, his Geraspeed, Geralac, Protein Power Pack, Ziggity Hoo 12, and Dyna Power. And Dyna Power, George Gadaski, I think, said it best. He said, one time I tried that stuff, and for some reason I got the worst cold and diarrhea of my life. So, if you can believe George Scrap Iron Gadaski, and I got to tell you, when George said that, this is at the TV studio. He's behind a curtain as Vern is doing a live commercial, and I heard George say that. So I don't know if Vern heard it on the other side of the room or not, but Vern would always say, you want to be a champion, take it easy, take it, go straight ahead on the Dyna Power plan. Well, whatever.
In my younger, dumber days, I probably put some stuff into my body that, no, not probably, that I regret. But I never did Dyna Power, and
that was the limit, huh? You'll do all those other things, but you won't do Dyna Power is the line.
Well, the man ate paste and he sniffed glue, but he would not do Dyna Power.
Hey, what's wrong with a few paint chips and I'm still here. But I never did the Dyna Power. But it was also, when that came out, that was I was much younger and I didn't need the Dyna Power. Although I will have to admit, I have an older brother who really got into lifting weights when he was in high school. He's 8 years older than me. And, I remember him using some protein powder. It wasn't Dyna Power, and I do remember asking him why he wasn't using Vern Gagne's Dyna Power, and he didn't have an answer for me. He just goes, this stuff was cheaper. That was pretty much it. And I was probably 6 years old. I didn't know any better at the time. But no, the George Scrap Iron Gaddafi story is about the closest that I can get to an end result from what apparently was not exactly a healthy protein powder.
No doubting George Gaddafi.
Hey, it's a testimonial.
You're right.
Hey,
in testimonial.
In testimonial.
All right.
For you, Mick, from Joshua Adler. Settle an argument, please. His uncle says that the late superstar Graham was always a bad guy when he wrestled in the Twin Cities, and he swears he remembers him getting cheered by the crowd. Is he nuts, or was Graham once a fan favorite here?
He was. Billy started out, of course, as a heel here in the AWA, flamboyant to a fault, and he feuded with just about every mainstay babyface that there was. Wahoo McDaniel, of course, comes to mind, the Crusher, Ivan Putski. But then later on, there they are. Look at that, joined at the forehead.
I love that. I love that picture. Like I've seen a couple of pictures of those two guys. That's a great picture.
Superstar Billy Graham and Dusty Rhodes, who both came in as heels here in the AWA, wound up in mid-1970s, about 1975-ish, teaming up, and they had a long run with the hated German tag team of Horst Hoffman and Baron von Raschke. So, in fact, superstar Billy Graham did leave the territory as a babyface. Came back again in, I believe, 1982 or 83 as a heel, but it was not the same superstar Graham. He was doing a karate gimmick. He had lost a lot of the definition, a lot of the size. So he is correct. Superstar did have a run as a babyface.
And from this perspective, yes, he was one of my most hated heels growing up. So he was indeed both. I'll still remember Superstar as the badass.
Absolutely.
All right, let's get to the next one here, guys. This is for me from the Mad Slovak. He's a longtime fan, not as long as Mick. Wow, but a long time. And I always felt Larry Hennig was underrated. My thoughts, I don't think he was underrated. I feel like when you're given the sort of, shine and the, I don't even want to call it a push, because whenever Larry Hennig, to my knowledge, was active, like he was featured. I mean, former world tag team champ, involved with, Vern. I mean, everything high profile with Larry Hennig. There wasn't anything that I feel like wasn't main event level when it came to Larry Hennig. So I don't know that I could say he was underrated. Maybe he's underappreciated, but I wouldn't say underrated at all. I would just
agree with you. Yeah, totally. I think underappreciated is probably more apt. As you said, world tag team champion with Harley Race. And of course, he had a long run here in the AWA. Probably had he not had the heat with Vern, maybe things would have been even bigger for Larry Hennig. But Larry wrestled in Madison Square Garden. He wrestled Bruno Sammartino, wrestled in Florida, wrestled out west, wrestled in Japan. I think with Larry's passing, I think his legacy really came to the forefront.
Yes,
people really appreciated just how good this guy was.
And it's so sad that it gets to that point that somebody passes and then you kind of take them for granted, right? It's that saying, you don't know what you've got till it's gone, and then Larry's gone and you're like, oh my God, this guy did so much. I mean, he meant so much to this company and was such a high profile figure.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, sometimes, unfortunately, it takes somebody passing to really appreciate just how good they were. You look at some of those Larry Hennig old-time promos. Larry delivered the goods. I mean, Larry sold tickets. He was a legitimate tough guy. And I would agree with you, Chris. Not underrated, but underappreciated, I think.
Larry was so good that despite the heat that Larry and Vern had, Larry still got the push. In hindsight, what if they got along? Would Larry have gotten a bigger push? Would he have gotten a run at the AWA championship during the 1970s? Or he may have had a short one. I don't remember a sustained one whatsoever, but Larry was mainly tag team. But again, he was so good that despite the heat that he had with Vern, Larry was still at the top. So I think the comment of overrated versus overappreciated, overrated or underrated, no. Underappreciated, I would say yes.
And it's interesting too that you talk about the heat between those two. I want to flip that to Vern and say, you know, kind of go back on the Dyna Power thing. I know we're having some fun with it. To be ahead of the game and know that you've got this new product that you could market, I think was great foresight on Vern's thought. But then to realize that even though there's somebody that you have legitimate heat with that you do not get along with in Larry Hennig, to still continue to realize that he is a big part and such a valuable asset. He didn't push him down the card. I mean, this was not relegated. He was at that main event status. Even if you didn't necessarily like the individual, you realize that that was best for the company, and that was going to draw you the most money.
Chris, right out of the gate, I mean, Larry, you know, initially as a rookie, it took, you know, he got his feet on, you know, got his feet wet a little bit.
Well,
Larry was a main eventer from, you know, from the get-go. Singles matches, tag team matches. He had a series of matches against Nick Bockwinkel, singles matches in the 1970s. Didn't win the championship, but again, as we have agreed here, Larry Hennig, to me, definitely Mount Rushmore of the AWA.
Yeah, and the fact that you said he, you know, wrestled those single matches against Vern, I don't remember them, and that's why I said earlier about how it didn't appear that he had a long sustained run at trying to get the belt.
Yeah.
He had, you know, he did have some matches, but never really like the big push that a Bockwinkel, Gagne, or Vern and Billy Robinson would have gotten, or Mad Dog even.
More of a tag team guy.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, let's go to the next one here, guys. This is for you, Joe, from Greg Sirota. Rocky Mountain Thunder. How, what, and why? Your thoughts?
So let me start by saying anybody that gets into the ring earns my respect. In the case of Rocky Mountain Thunder, in the case of Rocky Mountain Thunder, just somebody that shouldn't have gotten into the ring to begin with. Stiff as hell, bad as bad a match as I saw matches with Rocky Mountain Thunder that were on par with the Giant Baba and Bulldog Bob Brown Wrestle Rock match.
Oh my God. And that, which was like one of my favorite lines. Who is a Giant Baba and what? No, who is Bulldog Brown and what is a Giant Baba? I believe was your line.
Yeah. It just,
Rocky, he hurt people. I mean, he was so unskilled that he hurt people. Thus, I believe the promo picture of
Potato, yes.
Yeah. Man, Joe, you had to work with the guy more than I did. And
he was not a seasoned ring veteran. And you're right. He hurt more guys than the locker room would care to know. As far as the why, it was during the continued downslide of the AWA, and we were desperate for talent, and he came in and plugged as somebody, big guy, and let's give him a push, and he got a push all right out of the locker room and out of the arena. He just was not good.
You know, as strange and as silly as it sounds, Chris and Joe, I think Vern was looking for a big guy still to replace Hulk Hogan. He tried it with Silo Sam to replace Andre. He tried it with Rocky Mountain Thunder. It just never worked. And sometimes it was really, really bad, real bad. And this is one of those times.
And another name, I mean, all of the names that you threw out there are horrible big men. He did try to make Scott Hall the next Hulk Hogan.
Yes, he did. Yes,
as
he did.
well. But, you know, he turned out pretty good.
Well, Mr. O'Grodden, Mr. Scallop, Rocky Mountain Thunder.
Potato, by the way, that I think that was his best promo pick too.
I believe so.
Wow. Okay. For this is for the group from Trent James. Who do you think Hulk Hogan would have feuded with in the AWA had he stayed heel and Hulkamania not run wild?
Oh, had he stayed heel?
Who wants to go first? Yeah, if he had stayed heel. Because, I mean, there are two different ways that we can approach this, but Trent wants to know if he still would have been the villain.
Okay, if he would have stayed heel back in his day, he had any number of challengers. I mean, you know, you go down that roster in 82, could have been anybody. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that had he stayed heel and they flipped Jesse, that would have been a pretty damn good feud. You know, and of course they wrestled here against each other with Hogan as the babyface. But God, any number of guys, they, you know, from Bockwinkel, Blackwell, right on down the line, you know, whether splitting up the Road Warriors and having singles matches against Hogan. There would have been a lot of money to be made there with Hogan as a heel. But in retrospect, you can't argue with millions and millions of dollars in turning him babyface.
Yeah, not even a thought to not turn him babyface. I mean, he I can't imagine Hulk Hogan as a heel that early in his career, although he was.
Yeah, he was.
At least they tried. But during that run, especially after the Rocky III movie, there's no way in hell that you're going to have Hulk Hogan as a heel. And putting him in against Nick Bockwinkel, I've stated it many times that Rocky III provided the springboard for Hulk Hogan to get into the water as deep as he did. Nick Bockwinkel taught him how to swim, or at least was a big part of Hulk Hogan learning what to do inside the ring. Now, as far as, you know, other names, Mick, you're right. I mean, the roster was phenomenal.
Martel, Tito Santana. I mean, it's, you know.
I was thinking Martel was
kind of absolutely. I mean, Martel was huge. Tito was huge.
Yeah.
You know, Jim Brunzell had some great singles matches.
Jim Brunzell would have been great too.
Yeah. So there was a lot of wiggle room there.
The other thing that you said, Mick, about turning Jesse babyface, much like me not imagining Hulk Hogan as a heel at the time, I can't imagine Jesse being a babyface either at that time. Not saying that it wouldn't have been, you know, cool idea.
Yeah.
But Jesse was just, he had heel written all over.
I was going to say, could you ever see Jesse Ventura as a babyface?
You know, I'm not saying it would have been ideal for him, but I think if the program would have been set up correctly, if Hogan is this dastardly heel and Jesse is kind of like this cult figure around the state of Minnesota and AWA, I think you could have pulled it off.
Of course.
But again, bottom line, dollars and cents, biggest babyface in the history of the business. Hogan.
All right, the next one for you, Joe, from Leo Hansen. Of all the AWA events you produced, which one was your favorite?
Ooh.
Wow, great question, Leo. You know, if I take everything together, I got to go Super Clash 3, albeit that was the, to me, it was like the final nail in the coffin of the AWA, although it still survived for a couple of years after that. Super Clash 3, we did a rundown in Memphis, Louisville, and Nashville. Did that in about, I want to say, 4 or 5 days. It might have even been 3 or 4 days, where we made the circuit down there, came back and edited my ass off for 3 months, got all prepped for Super Clash 3. And while the event itself was nothing short of a disaster from a box office standpoint, I really enjoyed it, working with the other promoters, the David McLeans of the world, and the WCCW, Jarrett's territory from Memphis. That's why we went to Tennessee and Kentucky, I guess. It was a blast. I had fun. I really enjoyed working not only in the other territories, but with the other wrestlers, the Cactus Jacks and the Kerry Von Erichs of the world, Jerry Lawler, to have all of them under the same roof doing promos and getting everything scheduled. It was the most hectic, most chaotic, but the most fun.
Great answer.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because as an outsider, we look at it and we have a certain view of it. But you being on the inside and working with all of the promoters, and you mentioned, the talent and kind of how hectic it was, how really rewarding it was from a work standpoint, and not necessarily, as an outsider like me or, people that have watched it. So the two completely different views. I find that really interesting.
Yeah, well, the behind the scenes stuff is often different. Some may have thought a Wrestle Rock or something a little earlier, but I gotta go at the end. Go at the Super Clash 3. It, as I reflect back, and maybe a part of it was me during that time hoping that this was going to revive the AWA.
Yeah.
But 120 people in the audience on that wintry, blizzardly night showed me otherwise, sadly.
All right, let's go to you, Mick, for the next one from Stanley Blackburn Jr. You posted a photo on your old school Facebook page of Dick Murdoch and Dusty Rhodes versus Nick Bockwinkel, Ray Stevens. You said that Dusty and Dick were the crowd favorites. Wondering, those must have been great brawls. What can you talk about with that?
They were. I mean, they were great brawls. That's exactly right. You didn't have Luthez and Jack Briscoe in there. Although, of course, Nick and Ray could certainly wrestle. Rhodes and Murdoch, you got 4 heels at the time, but the crowd picked up in the corner of Dusty and Dick. And there is a picture from the Minneapolis Tribune, and I was at that show. And it's Bockwinkel and Stevens against Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch. And the article says it all. At one point in the match, Nick was tossed out of the ring. A fan jumped up on him, and all of a sudden it spilled back into the ring, out of the ring with wrestlers and fans. And Bob O'Brien, an off-duty Minneapolis police officer, actually got stabbed. Thank God it was just a pen knife and didn't do more serious damage. But in terms of actual in-ring riot, that is probably the number one for the Minneapolis area anyway. I know they've had shootings in Chicago and what have you, but it was amazing that Rhodes and Murdoch, as hated as they were, Nick and Ray were that much more hated that they inspired a fan to jump on Nick and lead into a full-scale riot.
First thing that pops to mind for me was the old school entrance that would have been done that day with off-duty Minneapolis or St. Paul officers escorting the talent to the ring. And in this case, it was needed. Bob O'Brien, if I'm not mistaken, that was not the only time he was ever security for the AWA.
Oh, all the time.
He was a longtime mainstay of one of those guys marching out the boys.
Yep, and again, in terms of match content, 100% brawl. Most of the time they went to a double disqualification or a no contest or that kind of thing, as you would expect.
Of course, old school. You gotta keep that angle going a little bit longer.
Yep.
All right, the next one is for me, guys, from Elaine Strassman. This is one that I've been asked several times, and I'm kind of glad that she asked us. I've stated that I didn't start watching wrestling until the late 80s. The AWA was starting to fade by then. So my exposure was pretty limited. When I decided to do a podcast, why the AWA, not a different promotion? Here's really what it boils down to. I was born in 1975. So I did not see the heyday. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to know a lot of things that I did not see. I'm not going to come off as being an expert on something from the 50s or the 60s or the 70s. I'm not going to come off as an expert about anything because I'm not an expert. I'm a fan. And when I started watching wrestling was probably 86, 87, 10, 11 years old. And of course I had the WWF, the Saturday Night's Main Event, the Saturday shows on TBS with, the NWA and then WCW. I watched World Class, Global, everything that was on ESPN. And part of that, it was the AWA. And knowing that there was this promotion that was based out of Minneapolis, I naturally gravitated to it. And I gravitated to you, Mick. And it was just, to me, the AWA, just because I'm a Minnesota guy, I was, grew up in southwestern Minnesota. I wanted to know more about it because I didn't know the AWA in the late 80s. I didn't know that was the waning days. I mean, that was what I knew. I didn't know about the Crusher. I didn't know Bruiser. I didn't know Vern. I didn't know Larry Hennig. But as I got older and I'm learning more about it, I'm like, well, God, there's so much about this promotion in this territory. Everybody's talking about, WWF or NWA or Port. They're doing all these different territories and nobody was talking about the AWA. And to me, it was like, well, why aren't we featuring something that was based in Minneapolis that you could make the case? Hey, kitty. You could make the case that it was one of the most influential promotions because of all of the talent that was here. Why is nobody talking about it? So when I was kicking around the idea, I wanted to learn more. And I can go on Google, I can go on Wikipedia, but that only tells you so much. Right. Because anybody can look shit up on the internet. Okay? Newsflash, anybody can do that. That's not adding much. What I wanted to do was add the context and the stories. And now that kayfabe has been broken down, Mick, you were involved. You were a fan. You worked for Vern. You were somebody that I instantly, and again, I was a fan of yours growing up. Here's a little inside baseball for everybody. I was a big Mick Karch fan, and I am a Mick Karch fan because I've gotten to know you as a person, and I love and respect the hell out of you. There's no denying that. We bust on each other, but you can give a perspective of the AWA that nobody else can. And Joe, when I first met you, like you added more behind the scenes, and that's what I want. I wanted this to be entertaining. I want people that can tell the stories and do it in a fun way that's engaging and that understands what the focus of the podcast is. This is not to sit here and bore you to fucking death, okay? Because people like to fucking talk and 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 talk. I don't want that. I want this to be about the stories. I want to learn. I don't know everything. I'm not going to know anything. For people that say I don't do my research, I don't know. Okay, there you have it. Okay, but I wanted to learn. I wanted to have some fun, and that's why. So there was my talk.
Chris, to that point, that's why you ask questions. And that's why your questions are meaningful when you ask them, because you do want to learn. Not everybody that turns on the podcast remembers a specific date and time. So there is a buildup. Excuse me. There are layers, as you've said. You've got
to set it up. For those that don't know about me, I've been a professional broadcaster since 1997. I work in the media industry. I've been a producer. I've been a host. I've been a podcaster. There's a certain way that you build things up in terms of a show and formats and concepts. Sorry, dude, this is like the most pissed off I've probably been. I'm now just starting to vent. So thank you guys for allowing me, but go ahead and feel free to put me over.
No, I think, I mean, let's use the Jerry Blackwell babyface turn as an example. We had somebody who said, well, it took you 32 minutes on your podcast to get into the actual turn itself. Well, you know what? If you're a wrestling fan who has no idea what the buildup or what the setup was, and we just said, well, this is when they started beating up on Jerry Blackwell. Let's go right to the footage. You have no freaking idea of the setup of the long-term storyline that led up to that in old school wrestling. So keep the questions coming. Chris, as far as the AWA is concerned, there's still an incarnation of the NWA out there. WWF in all its incarnations is still out there. The AWA is not.
It's gone.
The AWA is 32 years ago, folks. So certainly that void was here. Chris, I'm glad you contacted me about it. I'm glad we got Chupik on board, and I'm glad you got a chance to vent, and let's keep going.
Thank you, guys.
Sounds like a good idea. I one thing that I'll add to it is there's too much keyboard courage out there nowadays, where no matter what we say, I won't even say we, no matter what somebody says or somebody does, you're going to have somebody just be a dick.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do to change it. I just push them off, and it's like, hey, we're doing what we do. You want to tune in, maybe learn something, hopefully be entertained, then do it. If you are looking for exact seconds of what happened on what date and in this order and so forth, then go to Wikipedia. Hopefully we provide some form of entertainment for you. And if we don't, go check out another podcast. If you like what we're doing, come on in. Let's have a battle royal.
Yeah, and we've got so many good people that follow us, so many people that love the podcast, and we love you guys right back. Like, this has been an amazing project, and we've got so many things that we are still going to talk about. Guys, I got one more. Let's jump to the final one. We've got a few more that we're going to get to maybe on the next one. This is I'm going to go down to number 15, you guys. This is for the group from Ray Gomez. Ask each of us this one. We got about 10 minutes left here. Of the AWA alumni, those that are still with us, who would you like to have on the podcast? Joe, why don't we go Joe, Mick, and then me?
There are several that I could name, but at the top of my list, I probably got to say Shawn Michaels. He started in the business the same time that I did. I have not seen or worked or talked with Shawn. Of course, there's Shawn and Marty. The things that, oh my God, the stories from the showboat that, I'd love to have a chat with Shawn Michaels. Again, have not talked to him since '80s.
Did Shawn get Marty a birthday present, or was it the other way around?
Shawn is the one that was on the receiving end of the birthday candle.
Okay. I mean, I know you're giving us like an oral history of it. I just wanted to make sure if I knew.
I see what you did there.
Like that?
Yeah, I don't want to blow anything out of proportion, but Shawn Michaels. I'd love to have Shawn on the podcast. He obviously went on to.
That's the money shot right there, Joe.
Yeah, Shawn went on to bigger and better and greater things, and he deserved it. He went from somebody who is a great worker and really not that good on promos to doing great promos. And I personally loved his in-ring work. That match against Ric Flair, Rick's first retirement match, I marked out for that one, not because I was a huge fan of Ric Flair or Shawn for that matter, just the way that it was presented. I give them both respect right on down to that final super kick that Shawn gave Rick. But no, Shawn Michaels. Shawn, if you're listening, reach out. Would love to have you on this podcast. We might need several hours just to go over some of those showboat stories.
For you, Mick.
Well, first of all, we should preface this by saying, folks, there's a lot of people we would love to have on this podcast.
We could have a podcast about the people that we want to have on the podcast.
Yeah. Exactly. But we can't in a lot of ways. If they've signed a deal with XYZ promotion where they can't appear on another podcast, we're screwed. We can't do anything.
And we have explored. And those people have gotten back to us saying, I would love to, but contractually I'm obligated that I cannot do it. And we respect that.
We certainly do. And I'm sure that Shawn Michaels is one guy that has some contractual obligations. There are others out there, and there are some guys that we have approached, men and women, that have said, how much are you going to pay me? I want X number of dollars. We'd love to have you on board, but we don't do that. We want to, this is a low budget deal, and we're here to entertain.
Wow. Well, I make six figures a week. So.
Well, I do too, but they're all the same figure. But
and that decimal point is after the very first one of those many figures.
There's one person that I would love to have on this podcast, and I don't know if we can get this individual.
I would love it. Yes.
Oh, she has her own podcast and is doing extremely well. And I don't know who she is contractually obligated to. And that is our friend Medusa. Medusa was a guest on, Medusa was a guest on SNR back in 1989. We had her on a few times. Joe, you and I have talked about this in 87 when she got into the business. She broke in through Eddie Sharkey. She was a little green around the edges, and it took some time. But being in the ring with the likes of the Sherry Martells of the world, she earned her stripes real quickly. And I know Deuce has some stories about those early AWA days. That was her springboard to national stardom. You got to say she did it on her own, though. I mean, once she was out of the AWA, massively over in Japan, and then of course in WWF as Alundra Blaze, and WCW dropping the championship belt in the trash can. So many stories that we would ask of Medusa. She is an author. She's a singer. She's an actress. She does everything. She's a podcaster.
She's a monster truck driver. Yeah,
monster truck driver, media influencer, and everything she's done, she has excelled at. Everything. So Deuce, I'm going to try to get a hold of you sometime and see if we can get you on the podcast. One of my favorite people in the business, period.
And another one from the great city of Robbinsdale.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. My last one is going to be one that is still very, very much influential in the wrestling business today, maybe more so now than he's ever been. And ladies and gentlemen, his name is Paul Heyman. And I know he's a friend of yours, Mick. You guys had a chance to work together. What I love about Paul Heyman / Paulie Dangerously is his history, not what he's doing now, but starting in New York, Studio 54, working his way up, really legitimately the grind, an outsider, a hustler. I mean, his Twitter account is Heyman Hustle, and somebody who's got that sort of grind, that work ethic, who understands, he was the catalyst, people know about ECW and then after, but I just feel like the early stages in trying to figure his way out, you into the business and kind of figuring out his personality, I think is what I'm trying to say. I just feel like there's so much meat on the bone in terms of like developing a young Paul Heyman.
The interesting thing about it, Chris, and you're right, and you think about Paul Heyman, my God, talk about incarnations again. When he started out, and he's in Continental, and then he's in the AWA, and then WCW, and all the times he has reinvented himself. Even now, is kind of being the lackey to Roman Reigns and the Tribal Chief. Nobody does it better than Paul Heyman. I would be interested in getting him on the podcast to hear about his take on those AWA days. You mentioned that I was there with him at the time, and I've talked about this. He was so frustrated because Paul's always got those wheels turning.
And that's what I love, like creativity.
Yes.
I will take creativity and ingenuity and always thinking, always wanting to make something better, always wanting to add something. I will take that mindset 100 times out of 100.
There's detractors, for Paul Heyman, in the business. And, no matter who you are, you're going to have your detractors. But I remember Paul just would come out of those production meetings in the AWA days, and he'd come up to me and he'd say, I can't fucking believe it. They won't listen to me.
Yeah.
I want to do this. We should do this with Tommy Rich, whatever it was. And he got nowhere. So he was frustrated, but great pick, Chris.
Paul is just a few months younger than I am. So when he broke in, I'll say into the AWA, we're the same age. I recognized then the mind that he had for the business.
Mm-hmm.
More times than not, I agreed with what he wanted to do versus
was he ahead of his time?
Ended up being done. You throw on the fact that when he did a promo, I've said this a million times to talent, your job is to make me believe. Paul Heyman made me believe. He still makes me believe to this day. He is one of the best orators in the business. Mm-hmm. There are many. I'm still giving Bobby Heenan the top of rung on that ladder. Paul Heyman, from a promo standpoint, my good, I bring him on. Let's get Paulie dangerously on this podcast. I would love that.
All right, let's get to our shout outs here, guys, and we'll bring it home. Mick, why don't you go first?
My kids are going to get the shout out this week because not only do they listen to the podcast religiously, at least I know my daughter does. My son kind of gets distracted by his gorgeous wife, and but my kids back in the day, back in the SNR days, put up with a lot of dad not being around. And, a lot of Saturday nights and Friday nights and Thursday nights where I wasn't there, but they have been and continue to be my biggest fans, my biggest supporters. Love them to death. And my long overdue shout out is to Brett and Michelle.
I can't argue with that. I think you love your kids and they love you right back, Mick.
Thank you. I appreciate
All right.
it.
Family's a great thing. My shout out might be easy or cliche, but my shout out is to all of the veterans who sacrificed for our country. We had Memorial Day yesterday. This will be released during the week of Memorial Day, but to all of you, thank you very much. To all veterans all over. My dad was one of them. He didn't give his life for America because he was still back in Poland, but he served his duty as well. So not only a shout out, but a salute and deep gratitude and appreciation for all that they have done for us.
And I'm going to go with one of our newest members of our AWA Unleashed fan page, Randy. I'm retired. Loves it, listens to it every week. So thank you, Randy. That being said, we got 30 seconds, guys. Anything else you want to add to this week's show?
Not really. I'm just wondering where our residuals, where our checks are coming in. Joe and I had a long discussion about that, and you're the guy. You're the guy that writes the checks. So we're just wondering. We like the smell of burning rubber, so we're expecting your check anytime.
How about some Dyna Power?